Over the past year, the worldwide nonprofit organization Women's International League for Peace and Freedom has focused its peace activism on banning nuclear weapons. The Disarm End Wars campaign aims to enact legislation that will prohibit the production or import of nuclear weapons in the United States by the year 2020. In support of the campaign, WILPF members have visited the United Nations to help implement the Non-Nuclear Proliferation Treaty. The Disarm End Wars campaign represents just one effort throughout the WILPF's near-century-long history of peace activism. The WILPF was founded in April 1915 by women who came together in Europe as a Congress of Women to protest the death and destruction that the First World War was then causing in Europe. While World War I raged on, devastating the European countryside with trench lines and mechanical warfare, these women established a set of mission statements that continue to guide the WILPF today. The most important of which is to end and prevent war, ensure that women are represented at all levels in the peacebuilding process, defend the human rights of women, and promote social, economic, and political justice. Of all the founding members, social and political activist Jane Addams stands out in the organization's history.
Jane Addams, born in 1860 to a successful Illinois family, had a long, prolific career as an educator, philosopher, and social activist. Throughout this career, she made many significant contributions to the fight for peace and the empowerment of women. She co-founded the Hull House in Chicago and the NAACP, was the first woman to receive a Nobel Peace Prize, and even met with President Wilson to discuss a peace proposal, a conversation which ultimately informed Wilson's famous 14 points. Among other official positions, Addams was honorably elected the first president of the International Women's Committee, the earliest name for what is now known as the WILPF. She played a key role in founding the organization and forming its mission statement, which still exists today, to bring together women of different political views and philosophical and religious backgrounds determined to study and make known the causes of war and work for a permanent peace. Addams is probably best known for her involvement with the Chicago-based Hull House. Modeled after Toynbee Hall in London, the Hull House was founded as part of the larger mission to improve the lives of women, children, and members of the working class. In 1887, after reading about Toynbee, Addams traveled to London to see the building and its patrons. She brought back social philosophies that guided the creation of Toynbee. 6 years later, Addams' friend and colleague Ida B. Wells would also travel across the Atlantic to promote her own activism.
Ida B. Wells was born in Mississippi in 1862. Throughout her prolific career, she was a teacher, an activist, a journalist, the president of the Negro Fellowship League, secretary of the National Afro-American Council, a founding member of the NAACP, and was once part of a delegation to President William McKinley. In 1892, she became part owner of a newspaper called the Memphis Free Speech. In this same year, Wells wrote an article about lynching after 3 of her friends were murdered for being accused of raping a white woman. The article was controversial because it stated that the black men did not rape the woman but were in consensual relationships. Responding to the article, an enraged white mob burned down the offices of Wells Press. Afterward, she was run out of town by the same people, and so she fled Memphis. These conflicts promoted Wells' activism against lynching of black males by white racist vigilantes. Wells traveled around the United States and eventually to Great Britain, speaking and writing about lynching from 1893 to 1894. Her work became very popular across the Atlantic, and she found herself delivering speeches to various church groups about the prevalence of lynching in the United States. As her popularity spread overseas, she was interviewed and published in a variety of British publications. At one point, she was the guest of Lady Henry Somerset, head of the British temperance movement. She was even invited to dinner with Parliament. Before going back to the U.S., she helped establish the London Anti-Lynching Committee, which was a considerable win in her international fight to end lynching. Wells took her cause across the Atlantic and eventually helped change British social and legal policies. 14 years later, this dynamic of exchange would be reversed by another American woman named Alice Paul.
Alice Paul was born in Morristown, New Jersey in 1885. Her Quaker upbringing influenced her strong belief in women's rights to equality, education, and the vote. After finishing graduate studies at the University of Pennsylvania in 1907, Paul traveled to Great Britain on a scholarship, where she worked at various universities and studied for the next 3 years. She eventually met and was heavily influenced by the work of Emmeline Pankhurst, the founder of the British suffrage movement. It was during this time that she learned militant and defiant tactics from the British suffragists, who made their cause known by parading, picketing, and giving fiery public speeches. In some cases, more radical protests included hunger strikes. When Paul returned to the United States, she brought with her the activist attitudes that she learned from the British suffragists. On March 14, 1913, the day before Woodrow Wilson's first inauguration, Paul organized a parade with more than 5,000 suffragists in attendance. The massive amount of participation, along with the public's violent response, garnered attention for Paul's cause. After the scandalous event, Paul joined the even more radical National Woman's Party. She organized an 18-month-long protest, taken up by a group known as the Silent Sentinels, to be held at the front of the White House. The protest was meant to challenge President Wilson's inactivity in securing women the right to vote. Despite police and public violence at the protest, Paul continued to picket. Even though she was imprisoned and subjected to force feeding after leading her fellow prisoners on a hunger strike, Paul maintained her defiant stance against injustice. In 1920, her radical international efforts paid off when the 19th Amendment was passed, finally giving American women the right to vote.
On April 28, 2015, women activists around the world will celebrate the 100th anniversary of the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom. For almost a century, the WILPF has maintained an international voice which advocates peace, equality, and the alleviation of suffering across national borders. In commemorating this rich history of activism, those supporting the organization will remember that the international efforts of progressive-era women like Jane Addams, Ida B. Wells, and Alice Paul helped pave the way for social activism, justice, and equality for women around the globe.